I just found this. I don't think I've ever listened to this before, but. If I read this right, this is the funeral music for Queen Mary, who was the wife of William of Orange, who became William the second, third, must have been the third, because William the first was the conqueror, right? And didn't William's son William, or was it John? I don't remember what his son was, but in any case. So this music is roughly from the period, well, it is from the period, if it's for her funeral. She died during the period that we're looking at. Locke dies in 1704, and this music was written for Mary's death that was 1698 or something like that. So this is...
Did they have these same instruments at that time?
That's a good question. Sometimes, even here in Anchorage, when they do a performance, like a Beethoven symphony, they've occasionally, or more, it's a little closer, of course, to this. Although Handel, I was thinking, let's play some Handel, but I looked, and Handel really is after this period. But the symphony has performed like the Messiah, with a small chorus and with instruments from the period. And people were disappointed because they're used to the Mormon Tabernacle Choir and a full-throated orchestra. And you get the instruments from the period, and it's like, well, they're not very loud, are they? So good question. I don't know. I'll have to check the individual stats on the particular performance. They might have more here. But this is Purcell, or Purcell. I've heard it pronounced both ways. But I just thought throw in some music from the really cheer us up. Very cheerful funeral music. Maybe not. In any case. So, but before we start thinking about John Locke today, we really need to finish up a little bit on Spinoza, because the part that Spinoza influenced John Locke. I think I mentioned that Spinoza kept things pretty close because he didn't want to get in trouble. He was actually offered opportunities to go and teach at universities, and he said no. He instead stayed home. His main job during the day was grinding lenses, which apparently killed him. Because, back then, I guess, they didn't realize grinding lenses in a small little room and inhaling the glass dust is not very good for you. And so he died of a lung ailment, apparently, which everyone suspects was because he was breathing the dust from the glass. But the effect of his ethics argument, and thank you for reading through it and trying to decide whether or not it was very persuasive or not. It's very confusing to me because it is very persuasive, although of course you're buying into the vocabulary of the monks from the scholastic period, which, if you accept their definition, and I think that was the scary thing for a lot of people, because if he's basically taking the theologians' definitions and then following through with what becomes those axioms and then the propositions, it makes it look like orthodoxy demands that you become a pantheist, which of course is totally contrary to even today. There's one of my favorites actually is a book by Pope Benedict, which you could look up as Pope Benedict Um, or, of course, Joseph Ratzinger, his birth name. And it's truth. How do you spell truth? Or truth and tolerance. Not or. But in truth and tolerance, Pope Benedict, who's no longer the Pope, right? He resigned, so he's now Eggs Benedict. Eggs. Sorry, there was another joke associated with him too that I mean I love the Pope. In fact, he was my favorite so far, whatever. But he while he was Pope John Paul II right-hand man, he was referred to as the Pope's Rottweiler, which is, I guess, sorry for Rottweiler. Rottweilers are nice dogs, but they have a bad, image, because they're, kind of, By the way, the vet told me, because I had one once, and he told me the reason that they're so, miserable, in a way, the way they growl at everybody, is because they have really bad eyesight, and they don't know what it is. Because it doesn't know. What is that? There's something over there. As a breed. But in any case, so everyone called him the Pope's Rottweiler. But then he became elected Pope himself, and so everyone started calling him our German Shepherd, which of course is a much nicer dog, depending on whether it likes you or not, right? It has a better reputation. And of course, he was the first German, as far as I know, he was the first German elected Pope. Because normally the joke used to be, when I was a kid, is the Pope Italian, and now, of course, for years it hasn't been an Italian Pope. Because there's hardly any Catholics in Italy anymore. Sorry, that's just true. In any case, so in this book, Joseph Ratzinger argues that the main difference between Buddhism and the Catholic theology is that for the Buddhists, the world is everything, whereas for the Catholics, you have the world and God is other. And so that's the main difference between them, according to this book. And by the way, it's about the question of, okay, so sociologically, it's totally destructive to a society to go in and change their culture, because you're not being very tolerant when you go in and you want to change a society's culture. On the other hand, as the Catholic Church, we're absolutely convinced we know the truth, and you guys don't, right? How do you handle that? Because you want to be tolerant. On the other hand, you want to persuade them to believe, in your faith. By the way, that doesn't really go away. Say if you're French today, they have the absolute requirement that you depict yourself in public as a believer in laïté, right? Which is their word for secularity, right? So it's a secular society, and what they mean by that is, you don't essentially separation of church and state. Even in your public behavior, it's not just the state; it's your, as a citizen's, job to be demonstrably French, which doesn't make you Catholic. Although, of course, they actually support the Catholic Church with their taxes, which is an odd sort of thing for, but let's not get into that. But that's they're absolutely welcoming to people. They're very tolerant, so Islamists can come into France. You're welcome, but they've got requirements that within 2 years you have to learn French, and you have to go and essentially enculturate yourself into the French culture, so that within a couple of years you become French instead of whatever it was you believed in. So the French, right, you see how this works, right? So they, yes, we'll accept you, you can come in, but hopefully you'll be smart enough to learn to be smarter than you are now. By coming into France, you become enculturated into the French, right? And that means you're not going to believe whatever crap, right? So they're tolerant to a point because they believe that once you've come into their incredibly fantastic culture, you're going to quit all those stupid beliefs that you had before you got there, right? Problem is, of course, they had so many come in at once that they ended up with slums that became essentially neighborhoods where only that original cultural group's language and religion, etc., were espoused, and so there was no opportunity for the people in those groups within a couple of years to become French. And of course, if they didn't become French, then there was no career possibility for them. And so, of course, that erupted in all, right, so in a sense, France, you could see, has that same dilemma that Benedict is posing here. And by the way, that's, I think, one of the reasons that the Catholics were not considered Christians by a lot of Christians, because Catholics are essentially a lot more secular in a lot of their beliefs. I might have to explain that if you ever want me to explain that. So they're not literalist, for example. They don't read the Bible literally as true. That's actually kind of an odd thing that happened in the United States because a lot of uneducated people started reading the Bible and interpreting it for themselves and skipping a couple thousand years of theological history, basically. Does that make sense? No? Don't throw anything, but if we need, that's a whole other thing we could discuss. Okay, so by the way, I would encourage that kind of attitude here in our country, although we're more strict on the tolerance part and less strict on the you become acculturated to American beliefs or you're out. We don't have that, right? But of course that ends up with all kinds of problems for us, as you're probably well aware, etc., right? What would be really fantastic, I think, would be if we had a World Council of Churches, we do actually have one, that would all get together and decide to license people who would claim that they are speaking for a particular religion, so that certain individuals that are clearly way off and dangerous would not be allowed to profess that they are messengers from God and things of that sort, so that basically you would have a rational collection of religions that essentially would all be in agreement at the basic principles, etc. If you're curious, the best book on that topic, if you're interested in this, is Miroslav Volf. And he's got several books, but Flourishing, if I spell it correctly. So the first point he makes, of course, is that we need religion because it establishes the big picture. It's essential. Believing in a religion is essentially believing that you understand the reason that we're here in a big picture sense, right? And thanks to that big picture, that's where you get your role that you're supposed to play in this narrative, which identifies who you are and gives you a sense of how you play that role and how you maintain your place in that society. So it answers the big three questions that every society needs to give a person so that you know who you are, why you're here, etc. So in a sense, so I'm not saying a traditional religion necessarily, although he certainly does. But highly recommend. He's a Yale religion professor, by the way. He's also got YouTube videos, so you can, of course, always watch him. Miroslav Volf. A really nice one is a discussion at Yale between him and David Brooks. If you're familiar with David Brooks, he's the New York Times columnist, etc. Okay. So why is that connected in my mind to Spinoza? Spinoza, even though he's unorthodox, he's heterodox, right? A pantheist is certainly not Christian because for the Christians, God is other, right? But nonetheless, he says nature is God, laws come from God. Nature is basically all part of God. There are different modes of existence. So for humans, there are two modes that we experience. One would be Descartes' mind, and the other would be Descartes' body concept. So material mode and the mind mode, right? And God, by the way, has infinite modes. If you remember his argument, we can't understand God at all, etc. He's way beyond our comprehension, etc. But the two modes that we do understand, according to Spinoza, are the material mode and the spiritual or mental or mind mode, right? And so he's a mind-body dualist the same way that Descartes is, that there's two separate, the mind and the body. But there's a difference. He doesn't believe that they interact. So remember the puzzle that we had with Descartes, how Rene, think about it, That's, by the way, Elizabeth was the famous correspondent that Descartes had, who said, Rene, darling, how on earth is this supposed to work? Or whatever accent you want to put her in. I think she was of Bavaria, whatever. But, whatever her accent was, so if the one is completely non-physical and the other one is physical, how are they supposed to, that's just dumb. So clearly, genius that he was, there were smarter women around than him, because that's pretty smart, right? In any case, Spinoza is a mind-body dualist, which is why you even end up then with this marvelous little book, if you're curious. This is, again, Antonio Damasio. And his is Searching. Remember, with Descartes, he says Descartes' error. That was his earlier book. And with this one, he's searching for Spinoza. Oh, looking for Spinoza. Sorry. How does that happen? How do you get those two words switched in your head? Looking for Spinoza. Joy, sorrow, and the feeling brain. So, and by the way, I don't think he found Spinoza in the book. It was still a good... Antonio Damasio was interesting because he starts off and then matures, so subsequent books. And my favorite one was actually The Feeling of What Happens, which is... it was a very informative book at the time I read it. I don't know if you're already familiar with that kind of stuff, but how all the hormones and everything are involved in the feelings that we have and so on. And one of the things I really picked up from it was his argument that it's just goofy to think that men are rational and women are emotional. That's just goofy. Sorry, did I make you barf? You went like this, like oh, I gotta, oh, no. You could feel it coming up in your throat. Oh, men are rational. But the argument he leads to is that we're all emotional all the time, or you'd be dead. Because the part where the emotions come from is the stem, the brain stem, and so all of breathing. Not falling over. Notice I'm not of course, concentrating on not falling over, otherwise I would be like this, how I will be in another 10 years, maybe. I'm thinking of Tim Conway and the Carol Burnett Show, if you ever saw that. So the brainstem is the seat of our emotions, basically. Maybe I got that wrong. Things have changed. But in any case, that has to be functioning no matter what happens. So if, for example, we're being calm and collected, then we're still being emotional. It's just our emotion is calm and collected. But we're still all emotional all the time, etc. But Antonio Damasio, and that one is the feeling of what happens. Prettier cover, too. I think you really can tell a lot about a book by its cover. That's just, depends on the book, of course, and the cover. Okay, so how do we interpret Spinoza's mind-body dualism? And my answer, which is not Damasio's, but my answer to it is that he's using language. He's talking about our language, that we have two different vocabularies. The one vocabulary is all about the physical corresponding events and things, causality, this pushes that, this is heavy, etc. That's a vocabulary. The vocabulary of Galileo, the vocabulary of Hobbes, the vocabulary of Descartes. But we also have a vocabulary about my feelings, about my thoughts, about my desires, my choices, etc. And that is a different vocabulary. It's a different way of speaking, even about the same kinds of things. So I might make a free choice to have pie instead of a donut, whatever, right? But that will result in a physical event. I'll be eating the pie instead of the donut, right? So if a scientist is trying to figure out my behavior, he's going to map out my physical choices, and even if I've got a brain process that's being watched through an MRI or SPECT scan or something, and they're looking at it and saying, "Aha! Here's the decision being made to eat the pie." Right? And then I go, "Oh, I'd like pie." So they can argue, "Oh, so the brain decided for you, and then you thought you made the decision by like a nanosecond or whatever," right? Maybe you've heard, they see the decision being made in the brain, and then you made the decision, right? So it seems like the physical brain does it first, and then you know about it. So we say that my consciousness supervenes on the physical process, right? So all this stuff is happening in here, but I'm kind of like a rider, almost like Descartes has that little homunculus sitting in the driver's seat, but it's not like driving anything. It's just watching somehow. So I'm aware that I've made that decision, right? By the way, Steven Pinker, when he argues about this, he points out, but it's my brain. So of course I'm still making the decision, right? It's not like someone else made it for me, because it was, my brain that did just that I'm not consciously aware of the decision I made. By that, it's smaller than a real second, so it's really fast, In fact, I have wonder if it's their measuring device that misleads them or something, or how do you measure that, I'm going to do, so at what point do you utter that you've made a decision? How close is that to when in your mind, I've solved my choice, right? I don't know. I don't know how you can measure that, especially when they're talking such small amounts of time. In any case, so we've got two processes that we describe in one sense, we have a language that we use to describe the physical, what we call the physical, and the other, the mental, right? So here's my interpretation of Spinoza. He's on track onto this. He might not have the vocabulary to clearly state it because he's pre-Wittgenstein by a long period, right? Doesn't have the sense of language games, that we have different language that we use in certain forms of life. This is Wittgenstein's terminology, right? So I use a certain vocabulary when I'm shopping in the store, right? I have a grocery cart. I have sale items right next to items that are not on sale that I can buy. I mean, there's all kinds of goofy vocabulary associated with grocery stores, you know. Do you have coupons, you know, which is a blow in French, right? You know, so, you know, it's just, you know, all sorts of weird things. But that's associated with a particular form of life, the form of life associated with grocery shopping, right? Then you have other forms of life, you know, when you're, you know, at a funeral. You don't go to a funeral with a bathing suit on and a towel over your... Are we going to have a pool party? No. That would just irritate the heck out of everybody that's there to have a pity party, which is different than a pool party, right? Oh, sorry. Is that bad? My humor can be really off base. Okay, so you get the idea. We have different language games. By the way, as kids, you learn all the appropriate language games without realizing you're learning them as language games. So my understanding is, I've never spent that much time with kids to figure this out, but I understand that when kids are talking with their friends, they talk one way. When they talk with their teacher, they talk a different way. When they talk with their parents, they talk a different way. When they talk to strangers, if they do, they talk still a different way. In other words, they've already learned to attune a set of vocabulary to circumstances. And of course, that just develops further as we go. Remember my suggestion and why I grade things the way I do is because it's vocabulary. Learn your vocabulary. The more you hear, see, speak, read, the vocabulary of your course, the more fluently you'll be able to understand that vocabulary, right? So I interpret what Spinoza's doing as really very, very sensible. When you just study it without that kind of interpretation, somehow people interpret Spinoza as meaning that the mind and the body do not interact, but when my arm goes up, I know it. And I might want my arm to go down, and just so happens, as I want it to go down, it goes down. So it's like just amazing how these two things coincidentally happen together. And his explanation is, well, but God created the whole thing. He knows exactly what's going to happen. He's a determinist, right? So it's a machine. It'll go... You know, and it just so happens that just as it goes, in my mind, the hand goes down and dings or something, right? You know, so it's just amazing how God has arranged, you know, these two parallel things to remain parallel, right? Even though there's no mechanism by which they stay linked, right? Okay, that just sounds really wacko. It's even worse, actually, than Descartes, I think. Right, but my interpretation is that he was realizing that we have these two different modes, and that we conceive of these modes that way. Okay, so that being the case, nature being all God, we should be tolerant. This is Spinoza, right? We should be tolerant of others. Now remember, he was raised Jewish. He got in trouble with his synagogue because of his heterodox beliefs, etc. Trouble with the Protestants in Amsterdam because, you know, he was doubting everything, right? You know, questioning everything is that video. That was Descartes. But no, that was Spinoza. Phew, sorry. The video that I just showed a brief glimpse of, yeah, Spinoza. So he was doubting everything. So he was in trouble with everyone, basically. Uh, um, and then, even though he was invited places he didn't want to go, because he felt put himself in danger, perhaps. The one philosopher that did have a more than a brief encounter with him was Gottfried Leibniz, who on his return trip from England came through Amsterdam and spent 2 weeks with Spinoza, going over Spinoza's ethics. So even though he hadn't published it, Leibniz spent 2 weeks with him, and was very much influenced by Spinoza was the older one, but if you're curious about this 2-week-long relationship, it's the heretic and the courtier. Or the courtier and the heretic. So Leibniz, of course, is the courtier, and Spinoza is the heretic. And it's not just, well, the focus is on their 2-week meeting, but it does build up a little bit with Leibniz and a little bit with Spinoza, and then puts the two of them, etc. So that's a great book for getting a sense of the. By the way, I've come to find biographies are absolutely essential to getting a sense of the philosophy of a person, because and part of that is our own contemporary point of view that you're not going to understand somebody unless you walk a mile in their moccasins, right? You know, you've got to understand where the person's coming from to get a sense of all of that. And I would interpret that, by the way, as learning the vocabulary. You know, if you're going to understand a paragraph of their written work, you've got to study their vocabulary in other cases so that you see what the heck the background meanings to those words are for them, right? And so I love biography. Wish I had learned to use biography as a source much earlier. I first read biographies even as a kid. I remember Thomas Alva Edison, you know, reading stories about them and stuff. But mostly I read things like Tarzan. I don't know that prepared me for a future career, but Tarzan? Edgar Rice Burroughs? Okay, sorry. I am mentally ill, you know. Those are the squirrels. That, by the way, reminds me, as you're thinking about your term papers and you're picking your philosopher, and some folks will ask, well, should I do it about the life of the philosopher or about their thought or my reaction to their thought? My answer is yes. You know, so that's where or is, remember, it's the inclusive sense of or, doesn't mean one or the other. Yes, it makes sense to me that you study the individual somewhat to get a sense of what they're saying, and certainly I'm interested in your reaction to what the guy or gal is saying. Judith Butler. Judith Butler is really important today, by the way. I see more and more things about how important and influential she is. I'm reading, I don't know if I mentioned it, but Death or Kill All Normies. You heard that one? You've heard of it? Or did I already mention it? I did mention it. And she's very prominent in that. Not because she wants to kill all normies, but pretty interesting. And of course, it would make sense to find out why. Why would that be so important? Why would there be like 100 different genders today instead of just, when I was a kid, 2 genders? You know, unless you were German, then there were 3, because neuter was, you know, well, English we have neuter too. Okay. So back to Spinoza. Tolerance is the only sensible thing to do, because everybody is part of God. So by killing you for your gold watch or something, I'm insulting God, not just stealing your watch and killing you, right? So we're all part of God, so therefore I ought to respect everything, right? And what about if they believe in a different religion? Well, of course, in the time of Spinoza, that was the Inquisition, that was all these people getting killed or tortured just because they believed Jesus was, not completely God, just mostly God, which, that was before, of course, the Princess Bride. But that could get you killed for using unless it's exactly the right vocabulary. And by the way, if you're in a little village with no education, it's incredibly easy for you to be saying the wrong thing because you're repeating what you hear. And so if someone came in and started teaching you things that others would say, oh, that's unorthodox, you're in trouble now for believing that. How did I know? I had no clue where this came from. Well, they would come in and basically wipe out the whole town because the whole town had ended up going unorthodox, right? Whoa. And by the way, a lot of people make fun of the Inquisition. I did too. But it turns out that the Inquisition was a real godsend to a lot of the conflicts, because you basically had the town rioting and deciding for themselves who to kill, and they would basically kill everybody they didn't like, right? Is she a witch? Right? You familiar with this? Everybody familiar with it? Burn her, right? I'm talking about the Monty Python sketch. You know what I mean? You don't know? Oh, okay. You do. Okay. Well, congratulations. You're enculturated, that's for sure. Wit. Oh, it's. Doesn't it just make you want to smack your head? I don't know where the heck they got that.
I think they got it from
By the way, means Jesus give us peace, but that guy had shaving cream on his beard. I don't know why. This is equivocation. She's made of wood.
How do you tell whether she is made of wood? So the bridge out of a... but can you not also make bridges out of stone? Oh, yeah. Does a wood sink in water? Oh, no, it floats. It floats over into the ball. What also floats in water? Bread, apples, very small rocks, cider, a baked gravy, cherries, none, a turtle, leg, a duck. That's it. So, logically, if she weighs the same as a duck, she's made of wood, and therefore, away.
By the way, this argument is totally fallacious. Don't go out looking for witches, please. Of course, this also totally screws your trust in scales. He's still got shaving cream all over him.
For you, who are so wise in the ways of Sir, I am Arthur, King of the Britons.
Sorry. Should just have a class on the Monty Python. That would be fantastic. In fact, you could certainly do the meaning of life as a philosophy course. Okay, so the point I'd like to make here is, that is absolutely hysterical, but I don't know how far from the truth it is. Actually, Middle Ages villages were pretty. From what I've seen or read, I mean, the few times I visited Middle Age, villages, they were.
You have a time machine that we don't know about?
I do. It's called a TV. Oh, okay. So, the interesting thing is that the Inquisition were educated people coming into the village, and sure they used torture. That's they really thought torture would help. And by the way, we still do too. Talk about waterboarding at various Abu Ghraib, places, where they literally argue, okay, well, if you're in a situation where you can find out information by torturing the person, and that enables you to save so and so, can you trust the information? All that, is certainly an issue. But the thing was, they did keep records, so you could actually read the trial records of the Inquisition, which is out there. One of the inquisitors became a pope. That was the pope that was during the schism, where they had the two and then three popes actually at one time because of the Avignon papacy, etc. But so it's actually quite interesting to think that way. Things are always more complex the more you dig into them than what a black and white picture gives you of things. And as a precursor to more modern judiciary systems. So it's a step along that way, actually. Okay, so why do we have different religions as far as Spinoza is concerned? And he's, again, in league with this new motion business with Galileo and Descartes and Hobbes and others. And he's convinced that they've turned an incredible corner science is the new religion. Science will be the way that we now find out the truth of everything. And he's clearly thinking that within just a generation or two, we will know everything. We will have an understanding of God's nature, how everything works, and so on. So he is very optimistic about our being able to know everything by using the scientific method, by using this algebraic method, etc. That we're going to solve all these big questions. And the reason religions are out there is because individuals are trying to do science in a primitive way. So Moses was basically being a world-class scientist of his day. Social science, how do you keep a society together? Well, you need commandments. You need something to structure the way people behave, right? And so Spinoza interprets the various great prophets that were out there, including Jesus, as essentially social science, scientists that were developing improvements in how society should behave and treat others and so on. And so even though there are all these different religions, we should respect them because they're all their individual attempts at going in the same direction, bettering the way people live and the way we get along with one another. And so we should be tolerant and respect even those of other religions. And there's that same thing with the French and the laity idea, right? I've been saying laicite is the word, sorry. But I believe it comes from, if you're in church, the people in the church are the lay. Does that make sense? I don't know. I don't know if that's the actual derivation of it or not. Maybe it explains here. But so that's his argument's basically the same as the French today in that sense, that eventually everyone will all be on the same sheet of music. All we have to do is promote science. Before long, everybody will be scientists, and we won't be listening to priests, beating their heads with boards, on things, because we'll know the real answers, right? So eventually, science will take over for religions, right? So respect everyone, and instead of killing them, give them courses, basically, on ethics and science and motion, and pretty soon we'll all be friends and happy with one another. Very optimistic, very optimistic. And certainly education does seem to be a great goal for trying to do that. If you look at Steven Pinker's book, and it's called Enlightenment Now.
He's being trashed.
Steven Pinker's?
For that one book.
This one?
Yeah.
By who? That would be interesting to see.
Oh.
I mean, obviously you could disagree with him over a lot of things, especially the way he interprets data. Statistics can be used by anybody for anything.
Yeah.
The statistician that died in the river, he drowned, even though it was only an average 2 feet deep. You know how that goes. But if you see a link somewhere, about someone arguing about him, the problem with his book, of course, is it's only good up to the point where his data has been collected.
Yeah.
What happens after that could, be, of course, very different.
Yeah.
But in this book, he points out that actually this is the best life has ever been. There's more of us now than ever. The quality of life is improved compared to ever. The amount of people being killed in wars is less than ever. But why does it look like we're going to hell in a handbasket when you look? Well, it's because of this illusion that the media gives you by always focusing on the bad stuff, because that's what sells the media, right? You look. It's just, I guess, data enough to support that. That you could say that. We actually all know. Good news is always on the middle of the paper if it's there at all, right? The bad news is what leads. If it bleeds, it leads, is an old expression, right? But the interesting thing is we're actually doing much better. Enlightenment now, and his earlier book was The Better Angels of Our Nature. What's the easiest way to... This was it here, right? The Better Angels of Our Nature argued that it seems like we're less violent. The data all supports that. And how is that happening? Well, basically science has developed a lot of things. We are more tolerant of other people. But what's enabled us to become more tolerant of other people is literature. We read books about people from other cultures, and once you get to know people from other cultures through their stories and of course even the media where you actually could see them, we could see stuff going on all over the world instantaneously via the new networks and everything, right? But once you do that, you realize that they're people too. You see them suffering. So here's their starving children, and here's their bombed out house. Here's their wedding feast that was blown up, because the missile thought it was a meeting of Taliban or something, whatever, right? So the communication, the novels, we're aware of all of these people, and as a result, we've shrunk our neighborhood, we've shrunk our world, so that we're less likely to want to kill people because we know they're just like us. They might have some clothing differences, they might eat spicier food or something, right? But nonetheless, if I had grown up there, I would have liked those things too. So who wants to kill other people just because they wear funny clothes, etc., right? So we could clearly look at Spinoza as one of the nodes that kind of pushed us in this direction. And John Locke is one that took him further. And of course, Locke is going to influence us in several other ways as well. The reason he was there in Amsterdam was not because he wanted to go and see Spinoza. In fact, by the time he was there, Spinoza was already dead. But while he's there, he does study the ethics and other writings, I guess, that Spinoza had available for him, including the political treatise. Why is Locke there? Locke, notice, is born the same year that Spinoza is, but of course the problem was Spinoza died early in 77. But John Locke is the assistant medical doctor for I forget his name offhand, but we could have it right here. Where is it? Here he is. So that was his connection, that he was a supporter of him. They actually ended up having a rebellion. It fails. Locke flees to Amsterdam. Shaftesbury did go as well, but died within 2 years. but Locke is his physician as well as advisor, counselor, etc. And when he gets to Amsterdam, to the Netherlands, he becomes attached to William, the stadtholder, or the of the House of Orange. So this is full of intrigue and so on. But William is married to Mary, who is the daughter of James II, who's the current king, and caused the problem because James was Catholic. That's a big problem in England, which has gone Protestant, right? He's also the son of Charles' daughter's daughter Mary, right? So his mother is a princess of King Charles I, if I got it right? Does that make sense? So, so basically when you get right down to it, there's intrigue here, and William married Mary, planning on using that as one more stepping stone to try to become King of England, which does actually happen, right? Because the folks in England don't like James, so they invite William and Mary to come in, and they become joint monarchs. Because remember, Mary actually has the stronger claim. So they come in and they rule together until she dies, when we have that funeral music that I was playing when you came in. And then William reigns still for a couple more years, but then dies, and I don't know who the heck comes in after that. It's on there, right? You can look it up. In any case, so Locke, who does live, I think, like at least a few years after William dies, he's writing through all this period. He's learning as he goes. Even though he's the court physician for Ashbury, I don't know if he is the actual physician for William. I don't know. William might have brought his own doctor from Amsterdam. But in any case, he's clearly one of the more educated individuals, and he writes his own treatise. And he's writing, being influenced by Hobbes. He agrees with most of the things that Hobbes says. But as you're reading through his text, you realize that there are differences, and some of the main differences have to do with what he considers to be the state of nature. If you remember, Hobbes in his Leviathan argues that there's a hypothetical state of nature where it's dog eat dog, terrible life is nasty, brutish, short, etc. And so we form a social contract. And for Hobbes, the main point of the social contract is security. And so he thinks a monarch is going to be the best form of government, right? But security is what really, Hobbes is always, he even claims he's born a twin of fear. Remember, his mother gave birth to him early, etc. And he's always fleeing. He's fleeing. He wants to be safe, so he flees. And there's a good reason for them, for him to be in danger because of the things he says, right? But in any case, a very important part of this, by the way, and this is a contemporary issue, is that rights, and I can even ask you this as your quiz question, if you like, today. What do you think should be our unalienable or inalienable rights? Remember, we have actually the Declaration of Independence is the source of this. We hold, all men are created equal and have the inalienable or unalienable, depending on your spelling, rights of life, liberty, and shit happens. That's true too. No, property was Locke's, right? So if you read the Locke piece, as far as he's concerned, that includes property, because, wow, well, you can't live unless you have property. Important part of this is however you choose on this, and there, of course, were individuals that believed that these were God-given rights. They were actually the folks that were inventing this in the first place. And today we would look at it and say that it's an argument. There are some conservatives that would get rid. I did this myself at the University of Virginia with a professor that's highly, we ended up arguing. Said, of course, that the social contract is what creates the right. He goes, no. Red in the face, and I thought, oh my goodness, this is highfalutin professor at University of Virginia. And I'm like, say no more. Because at the time, he and his wife were rescuing our students that we were there with, because it was raining, and we had left here. It was the summer, and we thought, we're leaving Alaska and going to Virginia. It's going to be beautiful weather there. So the students all had things like shorts. We got there, and it was a hurricane. So they were all soaked from walking around the campus. And fortunately, his wife arrived with extra clothing that she just distributed, and I bought my Virginia University umbrella and everything, which I still have. But so I'm not going to argue with him. But guess what? That's just wrong. The social contract creates the rights. That's where they come from. And notice, for Hobbes, if you're in a state of nature and everyone has all the rights, right? Everyone has all the rights. There's no restrictions, right? But if I like your watch, I could kill you and take your watch, and that's not a very good right. We don't want that to happen. That's one of the things we have to negotiate and say, okay, what are the limits here, right? So the contract actually creates the rights. And so that's a really important thing. And especially when you realize, well, we're inventing new rights all the time, right? One of the problems that happened with Clinton and then Obama and still today is the idea of the right to health care, right? You read Jefferson, notice there's no mention of health care. They didn't know what it was. Health care? Remember, for years, the hospital was a place to go to die. It wasn't I feel pain in my, go to the hospital. No, you don't want to go to the hospital. Because that's where you go unless, I ain't dead yet, Sorry, there's another Monty Python thing. Let's not go there. I'm running out of time, I guess. But, okay, so rights are created by the contract. And as a result, and it's the same thing with, say, my deed to my house, right? The state of Alaska, in its infinite wisdom, has divided up the natives' property and given it to us. Well, because after all, they bought it from the Russians, who owned the place. Let's not get into that, right? But basically, they give me a deed that gives me certain rights over that parcel that my house is on. I have to pay taxes. I have obligations. The rights come with obligations too, right? That are outlined, that sort of thing. But nonetheless, we, the people, basically decided, what deeds allowed a person to have. But odd thing for me is I don't have any rights to everything under the house. That would really, they showed up with an oil rig and decided, okay, you own the property, but we're going to drill. I'm going to be like, it's right outside my bedroom window. You're going to run this thing? Yeah, wait a minute, Well, we bought the rights to the whole neighborhood. You've got the rights to drilling oil in Eagle River? There's 25,000 people here. You know, but they could buy the rights, you know, oddly, right? You know, so you get the idea. You know, we create these rights, we negotiate them, and guess what? They could change. Do we have the right to health care? Do you have a right to have your own Mercedes-Benz? I mean, actually, you know, with the way Anchorage is laid out, if you don't have a Mercedes-Benz, you're not being treated fairly, because you need a Mercedes-Benz to get from point A to point B without being run over if you're on a bike or a pedestrian. I mean, even the state plows will, you know, while you're standing there, you know, sorry, oh, geez, I can't believe a guy just got killed doing, you know, being that way, right? At least the plow driver stopped after he hit him.
I don't think he admitted to killing someone else at first.
Well, he was wearing dark clothing. Well, wait a minute. He was in the snow. Doesn't that help you be observed if you're in the snow with, you know, if you had a white suit on? And then hey, wait a minute. You know. All right. Sorry, I had too much coffee today or something. Okay. So, yes, the rights are negotiated. And, of course, when we look at Locke, he thinks there's different rights than Hobbes. Plus, he's coming in now not in support of an absolute monarch, but Hanover is a parliamentarian monarchy, right? So William gets his power, Mary gets her power, but Parliament is an equal partner. And by the way, of course, it still is, right? So Queen Elizabeth, she doesn't really get to rule. She basically shows up for special occasions where she can, you know, give everyone a good feeling, plus her family has certain estates, plus money. You know, there's all... Okay, so it would be great to be king or queen or princess or whatever. A little complex, right? But she is just basically doing what she does in assistance with Parliament. Parliament really runs things. They give her the courtesy, but basically Parliament is in charge, right? And that's pretty much, I think, the way things at least moved with William. And as a result, Locke is describing a kind of government that has a balance of powers. And the one would be legislative, Parliament, and the other would be the executive, right? Execute, you know, you execute the laws. So the executive, the monarch, has one. And by the way, in England, so the executive includes the judiciary. Right, so when you see the Queen march in her regalia, she's usually with the judges, of course, who are all in their regalia as well. So big occasion, only happens, I think, twice a year when the Queen visits Parliament, something like that. You know, has kind of like the, you know, the special occasions when they do that. So there's two branches of government in England. By the way, they don't actually have a constitution. They've got all kinds of interesting documents that are historically wonderful, although one of them was almost stolen just a couple of weeks ago. The Magna Carta was almost stolen. Unfortunately, the guy couldn't break the glass. He damaged it, but didn't get through it. And of course, the police got there and rescued everything. So either way, that's... oddly, it's in, I think, I forget the name of the town. The church, it's in an alcove next to the church, and it's near the, what's that ring? The Stonehenge. It's near Stonehenge. Can't think of the name of the town, but if you're ever there, you could take the bus tour over, and you go in and you could see it through the glass. Although it was gone for a while because they removed it for safety for a while until they fixed it. Okay, but so they have documents like that, but it's not like our Constitution. Instead, well, Roger Scruton explains that really well. However, When we think of how Jefferson, Thomas Jefferson, and his clique of individuals. By the way, Thomas Jefferson went to William and Mary, which is the college there in Williamsburg. If you've ever got, it's kind of like Disney World, except you can't drive your car in, because everybody's got wagons, and it looks like Williamsburg supposedly, so if you eat, you've got pewter stuff, and so I don't think you could eat off pewter dishes because the lead will poison you. But it's a nice little town to visit. You could see, all the actors are sitting there in the costumes of the time period, doing the various things, etc. Yes, you familiar with Williamsburg, Virginia? No. The college is up on the hill, so you could see William and Mary up there. And the State Hall is all open so that you could go visit. You could see where Washington and Jefferson would have, Madison would have all the Virginians would have, as young people especially, would have participated and learned a lot from the governor, etc. That was the seat there at the time. But so Jefferson actually is creative, because when he looks at Locke, who's one of the three heroes that Jefferson has, if you visit Monticello, Jefferson's house, which just means the little mountain, I believe, and you go into his main entrance room, he has 3 paintings on the wall. Well, we own it now, but there are 3 houses on the wall. Actually, it's probably a Monticello Society or something that owns it. But so you go in, and the 3 paintings he has are Francis Bacon. Remember I mentioned him as a precursor to Hobbes. Right? John Locke and Sir Isaac Newton. So those are the 3 paintings of heroes of his that he has on the wall. But so Francis Bacon doesn't really give us a lot of politics, and neither does Sir Isaac Newton. So where do the politics come from? From John Locke. And when we look at John Locke gives us the idea of a balance of powers. But he also, of course, Jefferson will also then give us that 3 division. So we have the legislative body, we have the executive, but the judiciary is a separate organization. At least as long as President Trump isn't the one that gets to fill it with his favorites, which isn't the first time a president's tried to do that, by the way. FDR famously tried to add judges because he couldn't get the Supreme Court to be in support of his. It came close. Instead of 9, we would have had, I think, 15 or something if he had his way. So I've got to shut up. Yes? No?
I have to go, but you can keep talking.
Well, thanks. But I think, are we finished at 2:15 or 2:20? So we're done. Unless you have questions. We should do a little bit more with Locke next class. So who do you think is going, I did ask a quiz question, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Who do you think is going to win Sunday?
Rams.
Rams.
Yeah, hope the Rams.
My last class were all Boston, Patriots. Boston
I'm a Celtics
Patriots.
fan, but I hate the Patriots. I like Brady, but I don't think.
What kind of food are we supposed to eat while we're watching this game?
Just beer. Just beer.
Just beer?
Only beer.
I like beer. Isn't that a song? I like beer. I think it's a Blue Neck song. Right? Blue Neck? No, Redneck. You know you're a redneck when it's Jeff Farnsworthy.
I swear that it's actually on one of the beer commercials. I don't remember what beer it was.
Well, be safe. Don't get hurt, on one of the tackles or anything.